Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 133 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Whitney Kobrin for this episode. And Whitney is herself widowed, and she really wanted to focus our discussion on giving hope to people who feel stuck. And she is actually a love coach, but we didn't talk about dating or about relationships or any of that. We talked about self-love and self-compassion. We also talked about the advice that you may have heard not to make any major changes in the first year. That has come up on the show before, but we haven't really explored it too much. And so Whitney tells us about her experience with this. So before we jump into my discussion with Whitney, I wanted to let you guys know some news from here. First of all, I had the best discussion with Dr. Lisa D'Amour last week, an interview about her upcoming book. It's called The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. You may have caught our discussion way back in episode 13. We talked about her book Untangled and her book Under Pressure. Both are excellent. I tell people all the time, Untangled, if you have a daughter in high school or middle school, definitely read that book. And if your daughter's in 5th grade or even 4th grade, you could read it just to kind of, get ready for what's coming. Her new book, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, is not specifically about girls. It's for all parents of all kids. And so it's coming out on February 21st, which is my birthday, actually. So listen for... that's a Tuesday, so our discussion will drop on Wednesday, the 22nd of February. And finally, the anthology that I'm working on, it's called Widowed Parents Unite. I've gotten some really terrific submissions from other widowed parents who have tips and reflections to share with all of us. That is coming out later this year, so stay tuned for more on that. All right, that's all the news from here. Let's get on with the show. Support for this podcast comes from BetterHelp. You can talk with a licensed professional therapist online, anytime, anywhere. Visit betterhelp.com/widowedparent to learn more and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/widowedparent. I hope you'll check it out. My guest today is Whitney Kobrin. Whitney became a widowed parent at the age of 35 when her husband passed away very suddenly. In the 5 years since that day, Whitney has a completely different life, a new home in a new state, a new school for her son, a new circle of friends, a new career, a new business. She now uses her experience and training as a love coach, helping women to love themselves and also to find love again. Her unique approach incorporates holistic healing that aligns the whole self, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Whitney's joining us today from Rockaway Beach, New York. Whitney, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, I've really been looking forward to speaking with you today. And, it's interesting because as we were talking previously, I know you're a love coach, which has, I think, different components. And I know it's got the maybe seems more obvious helping people with relationships aspect. But I think the interesting part that we want to kind of hone in on today is this self-love, self-compassion. Like, how can you figure out how to love yourself again after devastating loss? So that's, I guess, a very long way of saying I'm looking forward to talking with you about this. And why don't we just jump right in here with your story? Can you back way up, please, and just tell us, before everything changed, before your husband died, what was normal life like?
Yeah, so I had a son when I met my husband, and we got married when my son was in 1st grade. So, and my son's father wasn't really around. So my son called his stepdad Dad. We had a pretty normal life. We had moved from Florida to New Jersey to be closer to my husband's family. We were doing, a lot of regular family things. My husband had gone through a health issue, and we found out after lots of doctors and lots of procedures and testing that it was actually pelvic floor dysfunction, which is caused by stress. And I remember in the early part of that journey, some doctor said something about psychosomatic.
Hmm.
And that really triggered him. He did not want to hear that it was psychosomatic. He was like, this is real. I feel this pain. It's not in my head. And he got treatment for that and got better. And then it was, it was strange that he passed later when he was actually not going through these health issues, because his health was so bad at some point, we thought we might lose him.
But this whole pelvic floor thing was not, he didn't die of that.
No, he had a back surgery and passed away in his sleep 2 days after the surgery.
Oh, wow.
So it was actually quite mysterious. There was no specific cause of his death.
Wow.
They saw his temperature was very high, so they said it was sepsis. So that's kind of just a catch-all. And I actually spoke with the woman who did his autopsy and talked with her for 2 hours about all the different things that she went through. And it wasn't an overdose on painkillers. It wasn't a heart attack. It was very strange. And the other strange part about that is my husband told me that he had a dream as a kid that he was going to die at 37.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
And he was 37 when he died?
Yeah. And he
Wow.
waited until the year before, when he was 36. He waited. He didn't even tell me this until then. And when his 37th birthday rolled around, he didn't open his presents. He canceled his dinner. He was just in a really weird mood. And yeah, so it's a strange story. But what I have learned over these last 5 years since losing him and becoming a coach and going through all of this training and education, I've learned so much about how we are our body, but we're also our mind, our thoughts, our emotions, and our energy. And I can look back at his journey and what he went through and see that he was struggling not only in his physical health, but emotionally and spiritually or energetically as well. So.
Wow, interesting. All right. Well, thank you for taking us through that. That sounds actually rather unsettling that they didn't actually figure out what was the cause.
Right. And, I would have liked to know a specific cause and what it was. And, of course, I had feelings of guilt and remorse because it was under my watch. He was home. But I know deep down that I did everything that I could have done. And it wasn't my fault or a neglect. But I think a lot of people listening might have that experience and that shared.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. And so then you were 35, I think you said, and your son was how old?
He was 10.
10. Okay. So yeah, my kids were 9 and 11 when their dad died. So right around the same age. So what was that early period like for you? And you were having your own grief, your son's grief, and your son, like you said, it was his stepfather, but he very much considered him his father. So I hear that sometimes that can be a little tricky.
Yeah, I mean, the really sad part is my son has now lost 2 dads. His dad is around, but not really even able to take care of himself very well, let alone children. So we haven't heard from him in years. And so my son lost his dad, and then he gets a stepdad, and then he lost his stepdad. So he's really struggled, and he has some special needs as well. He has Tourette's and ADHD, and so he's got some challenges already, even before that happened. But now, of course, it's worse. And he felt very guilty also because my husband passed on the couch in our living room, and my son was there, and my son felt also like I should have known, I should have done something. And so he was dealing with those guilty feelings.
That's so hard with kids. And I think that's important to point out that kids often feel like something was their fault, even if clearly it wasn't, right? But kids don't, can't figure all those things out necessarily. And they often, or sometimes they'll think like, oh, if I hadn't said that mean thing, he wouldn't have died or she wouldn't have died, or, oh, if only I'd been a better kid, my mom would still be here. Like stuff like that, that adults would say, well, obviously that's not connected. Right. But it's important, I think, to be aware that the kids can be thinking those kinds of things that don't seem to make sense to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I could relate because I had a little bit of that too. And what I also noticed was even a year later, 2 years later, we go about our life and he went through therapy and had a grief counselor and a program and all that. But even later, it would still come up sometimes. And when we would have, I highly encourage everyone to have those moments with your kid where you create a safe space to talk about it, to go deep, to allow their deeper feelings to come up and come out and cry together. Because I noticed even a year, 2 years, even 3 later, he still has that inside of him. He still has that grief and he doesn't express it a lot. And something else I've learned through my journey of coaching and energy healing and all this stuff is that these feelings that we keep hidden inside of us fester like mold. And it can really help to bring them out. And some people might not want to cry and break down and have the big emotional response, but that's actually expressing and releasing. And, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know this now, that you have to go through the pain and through the tunnel to get to the end of it. But for my kid, he wasn't very expressive and he seemed to be doing fine. But I know deep down that he was still going through it. So having those talks, like sitting in bed together for an hour and just looking at the ceiling and talking about our memories and our past, like things would come up. And those were some of the moments that I cherish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So speaking of that first year, can you tell us a little bit? I mean, the first, weeks, months, that first year period, like how was that? And I mean, you're grieving and your son, like tell us a little bit about that.
It was definitely an emotional roller coaster. It was had many unexpected turns, but my husband was Jewish. And so first we went through all the Jewish customs, which I'm not Jewish, but I really appreciate all of the customs that they do. When people sit Shiva, everyone comes to your house for a week. And I really appreciated and benefited from that. I had so many people come out to help. We had a mom's group in my town and they put together a meal train thing and they sent us meals every day for a month. And there were a lot of people around for the first few weeks. And my parents came to visit me and my brother, my family. And I really needed that. I needed the support. And I was grateful that I didn't have to figure out how to ask for it, though I think if people are not getting it, to go out and ask for it. But then after a month or two, everybody was gone. And that's when it got really low because I was alone and I felt like I was still trying to live life the way I was living it before, but it just wasn't really possible. And I felt lonely. I felt confused. And when I was in those moments, I mean, I remember going to bed early and just laying in bed and just listening to something or reading or zoning out or watching TV, which I wasn't normally making a practice of that, but I was in that time. And those were hours that I was not present with my son, not helping him. And so that was one of the hardest parts for me was I'm dealing with my own stuff right now, but I'm also need to take care of this kid and I need to help him deal with his things. So, I did have a therapist and grief coaching program for him so that he had that guidance and outlet as well.
Mm-hmm. And did you find those things were helpful for him? And some kids don't want to go to those things. And then parents are like, well, what do I do? I know he should go, she should go. Right. But they're refusing.
Yeah, that's tough. I think, spending the time with the kid to talk about it, to let them share their feelings and their hesitations, and working through them with them to get them on board, because it is worth having those kind of sessions. And I think a lot of it is that we want to avoid pain, and we think the kids think that by going to this group setting or this therapy session that they're going to bring up the pain they don't want to feel. But again, we can't just let that pain fester inside of us like mold, where it creates other health problems and other problems in our life. It's actually better to feel that pain and express it and let it out.
I wonder what kind of things you found helpful in that first year. Were there any books or resources or practices that you found helpful?
For me, being around people was helpful, connecting with people. I mean, not all the time. I was obviously had a lot of time alone too, but if I was alone 100% of the time, I definitely would have gone crazy. And part of the emotional roller coaster was that sometimes I would get together with his friends or his family. We would cry together, but then we would tell stories about him and we would laugh together. And it was like this weird up and down of emotion, where when you think I'm going to be grieving, you think that you just might need to be sad all the time for a year. And I think some people might even go to the point of feeling guilty if they laugh, feeling guilty if they have a good time. And, you know, I don't think that someone beyond the grave doesn't want you to live your life, doesn't want you to have fun. Like, especially if this is your partner, who loves you, like at some point they know that they want you to be able to be okay again eventually.
Well, so was there a turning point for you at some point where you felt like, you know, maybe I am, or maybe we are going to be okay? Like how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had my coping mechanisms that were not super healthy, and but nothing that, you know, dragged me down completely. Like, but I really allowed for that first year. I heard advice from everyone that said, don't make any big changes within a year. So I didn't. I stayed in my job. I stayed in my house. And but after a while, it kind of felt like I was living in a shell of what used to be my life. And the people in my town, my friends, because I hadn't lived there for that long, so I had a few kind of close friends, but I don't know. I think people just didn't invite us out as much. Like, it was sort of depressing to be around us because we reminded them of death. And so after a year, I left my job. I became a matchmaker, which was totally different from the corporate HR recruiting type of work that I had been doing before. But I felt like I needed to do something that was more aligned with my purpose and my heart, and that just getting to director level at a company wasn't going to be fulfilling for me personally. So after that year, I made some big changes. And I did start dating, and I met someone pretty, it was like from the very beginning, I just knew that this was going to be the real thing, the real relationship. And it has been, you know, we've been together for 4 years now. And eventually I had to move out of the house. That was a really difficult thing. And I don't know if you've done that, you know, the process.
No, I'm still in the same house. At what point did you move out?
It was probably 2 years after he passed.
Okay.
And, you know, we had a big house in New Jersey, and I had all of his things, his entire life's possessions, his yearbooks, his clothes. It was daunting to think that moving meant letting go of his things. That was the hardest part.
Yeah. How did you deal with that?
Uh, I processed the emotions. I dealt with the emotions. I connected with his family and said, come over, get anything and everything that might be meaningful to you. You know, I distributed a lot of his stuff and gave things to people that it would be meaningful for. And then after that, I had an estate sale.
Mm.
So I found someone that helped me advertise the estate sale, and we had a line down the block at 8 a.m. to come.
Huh.
It was crazy.
Wow.
So I ended up just letting go of a lot of our furniture and household things and old, books and movies and even his clothes. I had people that really needed things. And so I tried to remember that I don't need it. He doesn't need it anymore. And letting go of the things doesn't mean that I let go of him out of my heart.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It's just stuff,
Mm-hmm.
really. And
Mm-hmm.
he had a huge collection. He went to University of Miami and was a huge Hurricanes fan, had a bunch of t-shirts. So I made several quilts out of his t-shirts. I had somebody make
Nice.
them and
Yeah.
gave them to his family members and kept one to have something of, his that had his energy in it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was the hardest. Moving out was really hard, selling the house, leaving that part of my life was really difficult and sad. And I remember breaking down when we had the estate sale and breaking down in tears and like being unsure. I
Yeah.
felt unsure that am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
We all have these questions and judgments, and there's a lot of people that will try to tell you what the right thing and the wrong thing are to do, but it's personal and it's
Yeah.
different for everyone.
So now, a few years out, with the benefit of hindsight, are you glad that you went ahead and did that?
Yes, yeah, 100%. um like I said, I can't describe it much better than this, but it felt like I was living in a shell of what used to be my life. It just felt
Mm-hmm.
like I was there, but it wasn't filled. It wasn't the same without my husband. And when I got into a new relationship, it's like he would come over and all the pictures of me and my husband were still up because
Mm-hmm.
it's not like we divorced and I don't want to see his face. It's like I still love him. I will
Mm-hmm.
always love him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't want to take the pictures down. So
Mm-hmm.
eventually when I moved, it was a fresh start completely. I got my own place with my son, and it really was a positive step for us. And I was able to then create my new life. And I've been very intentional about the life that I've created. I wanted to have a circle of friends and I moved to a new state. So I made a very conscious effort to meet people. I started my own meetup group to attract friends that I would like to hang out with. And
Hmm.
I used Bumble. Bumble's a dating app, but I don't know if most people know this, that they also have a Bumble BFF, which is
Hmm.
for making platonic friendships among women.
Huh.
It's probably a
Wow.
little bit of a younger demographic, but I've met women in their 40s and 50s on there. I'm 40 now.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept this vision of the life that I would want to create. So if I'm leaving behind one stage of my life, what do I want the next stage to look like? I don't want to just fall into it. I want to create it consciously. So making friends, here I am 3 years later in New York, and I have a really wide group of friends, and I have my three really closest friends that we get together often. And for me, that's what I needed. So I would just encourage anyone to think about, what do you need in your life? What do you want to have in your life? And then make the effort to create it and have it. And I know some people won't probably want or need to go through a big, massive shift, massive change. Um, People will stay in the same house and have the same friends and all that, but that just wasn't really didn't seem like an option for me because I hadn't been where even in New Jersey for very long. And
Mm-hmm.
in that big process of moving, and shifting my life, I also was shifting my career. My matchmaking career turned into a coaching career. So I started coaching people on how to find love and how to have deeper self-love. And it was interesting because a lot of the coaching training gave me the tools that I wish I'd had sooner to be able to process what I went through and to work through my own grief.
So that's interesting. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Is this where the self-compassion, self-love aspect comes into play?
Yeah. So self-compassion is a practice that I teach that I feel is a really important foundation for self-love. So a lot of people talk about self-care, and that's important. We do need to be taking care of ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. But you also want to watch your self-talk and your relationship with yourself. And self-compassion is a, a three-step process that's a practice that allows us to, one, be kind and compassionate with ourselves, but it also counteracts the stress response. So we know that stress is the number one killer in our country, that stress causes heart disease and all kinds of different diseases and health issues. And yet we live in stress every day, all the time. And after becoming a widow, your stress is crazy high. You have all the responsibility of taking care of the estate stuff. You have all the responsibility that your partner used to handle. You're doing everything yourself. You're being both parents. It's a lot of stress. And, you know, I think most of us, when we're under stress, we go to our coping mechanisms. We drink alcohol, we smoke weed, we eat, you know, whatever it is that might feel good in the moment to turn away from the pain. But what self-compassion teaches is to actually turn towards your pain long enough that you can provide comfort and reassurance to yourself. And that is so much more meaningful and powerful than just distracting yourself from the pain.
So what does that mean? What does that look like?
So the three steps, the first step is awareness or mindfulness. And you ask yourself, what am I feeling? So what's the emotion? Am I feeling angry, disappointed, exhausted? Whatever the emotion is, you want to first acknowledge that and then ask yourself, where do I feel it in my body? So this helps us to be more present and conscious and not, so I said that it counteracts the stress response. Well, each of the three steps counteract our fight, flight, and flee and freeze response. So awareness and checking in with your body, where do I feel this in my body, counteracts the freeze response. So instead of freezing up and getting stuck, you're still present. You're still able to think. You're able to be level-headed. You're checking in with yourself and your body. The second step is kindness. So instead of going to negative thoughts, self-judgment, self-criticism, or being, you know, you're mad at the person for leaving, and then your thoughts go to, why did they do this? The whys never end, I think, when you're dealing with grief. But instead, kindness is offering yourself compassion, sympathy, empathy, patience, soothing yourself. It's really self-soothing. So placing a hand over your heart, giving yourself a hug, like actually touching yourself, is scientifically proven to help your nervous system start to regulate itself and come back down.
Really?
So, yeah.
All right, I'm going to try this right now. Well, now my shoulder's injured, so this isn't such a good idea right now. But yeah, all right, I'm going to try this.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. When a kid comes to us really upset, what do? We hug them, we pat their back, we pet their hair, we give them some comforting touch. And even if you just think about if you had the perfect person standing right next to you that could give you the everything's okay, you got this, you're going to make it, and they put their arms around you. Like, it's very reassuring. And what I've learned is we could do that for ourselves.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to try that.
Yeah, it's always available. And then the third step to practicing self-compassion is common humanity, which just reminds us that whatever you're going through, other people have gone through it also.
Mm.
It's part of the human experience. Death is part of the human experience. Every single one of us will deal with other people dying. Every single one of us will die eventually. It's just a shared common experience. And practicing common humanity counteracts our flee or flight or run away and hide response. So a lot of people will typically isolate themselves when they're going through a tough time, when they're grieving, when they're dealing with things. They don't want to be a burden. They don't want to share the depth of their pain with other people. And that is actually not helpful for us. I mean, yes, we need to have boundaries and not make our problems other people's problems, but we do need connection. And common humanity encourages us to reach out to other people, to get support, guidance, help, just even a friendly ear, just to say, I'm not doing very well. I don't need you to do anything, but I would like to just have you sitting next to me, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, thank you for taking us through that. So self-compassion, and then you said that is a piece of or leads to self-love. What's the relationship there?
Yeah, so self-love is very broad. Self-love include, well, the way that I look at self-love is a relationship. So if you think back to a relationship you've had in the past, maybe there were times where you really loved someone, but the relationship wasn't good. You really thought they were a great person, but they don't treat you well, or they don't give you the time and attention you need. And usually those relationships will end. And we got to think about our relationship with ourselves. Are you mean to yourself? Are you nice to yourself? Are you there for yourself? Are you understanding and kind and patient, or are you impatient and snappy and mean? And I love this tool because of its ability to counteract stress. It's been scientifically proven to help us regulate our nervous system and bring us down out of a state of stress and panic. And this is so good to teach kids too. I started teaching my son self-compassion because they can be really hard on themselves. And this modern society we live in is always, you could do better, you can do more, go, 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 get yourself up, don't cry, right? And it's like, okay, sometimes that's great. Sometimes we might need a motivation to do great things, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we need to rest or feel or cope or deal with what we're dealing with. So this is a really great tool to teach our kids. And it also helps teach them about the mind-body connection, that what you feel in your body is exactly linked to how you feel and what you're thinking. And we just need so much love and tenderness in grief. It's an essential piece of being able to move on. And I remember feeling like, did you ever play Super Mario Brothers?
I did, yes.
So you remember some of the worlds, it would just keep moving. And if you didn't keep up with it, you would die.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like you got to go at your own pace. You had to keep up with the pace of
right,
the
because the screen
level.
is scrolling by and you have to keep moving and getting the points or whatever, jumping over the things.
That's exactly how I felt in the beginning. I was like, how is the world going on? How are people just getting up and going to work and going to school? And like, I just wanted the whole world to stop so bad. And yet it kept moving. So, you know, eventually after that first year, I started moving again and started living and started, you know, and I'm really glad that I have, because if I think back, it was hard. It was challenging. It was really difficult to move out of that house on so many levels, emotionally, spiritually. But now I can genuinely say that I'm happy, and I'll always love my husband, and I'll always miss him. And I feel the thing that makes me the most sad is that he's just missing out on so much. He's missing
Mm.
out on watching, our boy grow up, and he's just, that makes me sad. But when I think about my own life, I have a happy life. I have friends, I have activities, I have um, family relationships, and I do what I want to do. Even work wise now, I've created my own business that's exactly what I want to be doing on my terms, and meanwhile helping other people,
Yeah.
uh, with their.
Well, let me ask you about that because, I mean, if people are listening to this and thinking, okay, this sounds interesting, this sounds great, but I don't really know how to like proceed. Is this the kind of thing that you work with people on?
Yeah, so as a love coach, I help people in all areas of their love life as well as their emotional life.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of foundational work that needs to be done before someone can just go out and date. So for example, if someone's gone through losing their partner and they eventually get to a place where they think, I would really like to have a companion. I'd really like to have someone at least to meet, to go out with, to hang out with. And they realize that there's some potential there, but they don't know where to start or how to get it. And if they just start, like create an online dating profile and just get out there and start, most likely it's not going to go very great. Most
Hmm.
likely they're going to get caught up, they're going to get overly emotional, they're going to because online dating is a minefield. There are
Hmm.
so many triggering things that can happen. You get rejected, someone's just mean, someone's fake. There's so much out there that's hard that you really need to you need to be in a state of self-love and readiness and resilience before you can tackle that. But it is possible. I mean, this is the process that I help people through. Is
Hmm.
you're not ready to date? Great. Come work with me.
Hmm.
Let's look at you and what's going on inside of you and prepare you for that.
Hmm. And then if they are ready to date, then you also can help with that aspect too.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So I have programs that are just about self-love and self-discovery and helping a person to be their best self. And it has nothing to do with dating or relationships. So I do that mostly with women, but I do work with some men as well. And
Mm.
then I have other programs that are specifically about dating and finding someone. And then other programs that are about how to be in a healthy, lasting relationship,
Mm.
communication, and those kind of things.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, gosh, this has been so great talking with you about all this today. And I really appreciate your sharing your reflections and your experience and some tips here for us as we think about self-compassion and self-love and how it fits into this bigger question, I think, of like, who are we now and where are we going now? So, yeah, good. Well, thank you for spending some time with us today. Um,
Yeah, thank you
I
so much, Jenny.
Yeah, well, I always like to ask one wrap-up question here, if you don't mind, to leave us with
Mhm.
some parting thoughts. If you could say one thing to newly widowed people, what would you say?
I would say be kind to yourself. Be kind, be patient, be understanding, try to stay balanced. I heard the advice that not to make any big changes for the first year. And I think that served me well. I think I needed to wait and process at least for that first year. And then the other part of that, if I could tell new parents or new widowed parents, is even though you're going to have to go through that grieving and you do have to let the tears flow freely and let it all out, at some point, we do need to put one foot in front of the other. We do need to step out of it. We do need to focus on the life that's left. Who's still living? Who's still needs our attention and support, ourselves and our kids primarily, but that there is hope, that we can create a new life. We can find new people to love. We can, everyone at their own pace, and it's unique for everyone. But I encourage people to not stay stuck for forever, not stay stuck for too long, have that hope that eventually you will be able to move on and enjoy life again.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, terrific. I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Whitney Kobrin, who is a love coach, which includes helping people find self-love and self-compassion. So Whitney, where can listeners find you if they would like to learn more about your work?
Yeah, my website is whitneylovecoach.com, and I'm developing an app right now called Love Coach in Your Pocket. So by the time someone's listening to this, that might be available on the App Store, Love Coach in Your Pocket, or just find me at whitneylovecoach.com. And I do a free consultation with anyone. It's a love life strategy call where we just go deep and get to know you, what you're going through, what changes you'd like to see in your life. And whether they end up working with me or not, I use that hour to give them whatever help and advice I possibly can. So it's always a positive exchange.
All right, terrific. Well, Whitney, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Whitney Kobrin as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 133. And if you're finding the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful, please consider supporting the show. It's easy. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. That's buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. As always, thank you for listening. And until next week, remember, you've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.